When immigration policy becomes less about securing the border and more about securing political power, the debate stops being about solutions and starts being about survival in the partisan battlefield.
So today, 6 months after President Biden has left office, we hear Republicans continue to talk about how Donald Trump has solved our border crisis. But you won't be surprised to learn that they're also focusing on, guess what? The Biden border betrayal, that's what they call it. 6 months into Donald Trump's second term as president, it is increasingly clear who the administration is going after. Just look at how they're doing it. They're raiding workplaces and staking out court hearings. They're going after farmers and farm workers, students and families and business owners, many of whom, other than being undocumented, do not have any violent criminal record, and men who have been living here, contributing to the success of their communities and the country for years and years, if not decades. So none of what we're seeing happening around the country, or very little, is actually targeting criminals.
I served as Florida's Attorney General and watched in horror as Biden and his handlers and the radicals in charge of his administration systematically and intentionally broke down all of the structures and security safeguards at the border. And it was only through litigation that we were able to uncover documents that showed their plan was in place from day one. In fact, when they started rolling out executive orders dismantling everything that the Trump administration had put into place, they were warned by those in the administration and Border Patrol and DHS that if you do this, we will immediately be.
This segment from Pollitt presents a highly partisan commentary in which host Brian frames a political confrontation between Florida Senator Moody, portrayed as a rising star in the GOP, and Democratic Senator Padilla, with the central debate revolving around illegal immigration, border security, and broader political strategy. Moody's argument, rooted in her experience as Florida's former Attorney General, alleges that the Biden administration, from its first days, intentionally dismantled Trump-era border protections despite internal warnings from DHS and Border Patrol that doing so would cause an immediate influx of undocumented migrants, some with criminal histories or links to the terrorist watch list. She claims her litigation uncovered daily quotas to release unvetted migrants into the U.S., cancellation of detainers on serious offenders in local jails, and a radical shift in deportation policy away from removing felony offenders, actions she asserts predictably increased crime and endangered communities. Moody cites a judge's statement that the Biden administration had turned the border into a meaningless line in the sand and frames the administration
overrun. It put law enforcement at the border at risk. It put families and communities at risk. It put our nation's sovereignty and security at risk as more and more people flooded into this country with previous criminal backgrounds and those that were on the terrorist watch list. And as I pursued litigation, a judge said, Biden and his administration has turned our border into nothing more than a meaningless line in the sand. And when there were warnings that our border would be overrun when Title 42 was expiring, Florida uncovered
administration's approach as a deliberate ideological project rather than incompetence. In contrast, Brian frames Padilla not as a genuine policy debater but as a partisan messenger catering to the rich, white liberal base of the Democratic Party, whom he depicts as insulated from real-world consequences in gated communities and motivated by ideological theater rather than public safety. He accuses Democrats of wanting illegal immigration for 3 reasons: cheaper labor benefiting certain businesses, inflated census counts, since representation is based on total population, not citizenship, and virtue signaling to their base through humanitarian posturing, likening it to waving Ukrainian or Mexican flags as symbols of moral superiority. Brian argues that this benefits elites while harming both undocumented migrants, who work for serf wages, and American workers.
Documents saying that their grand plan was to step back and let it be overrun. And in my litigation as Florida's Attorney General, I uncovered that not only were they pushing more and more and more and more and more historic numbers into our country unvetted, that they established quotas every day to make sure that Border Patrol pushed a certain amount of numbers into our country that was barely vetted. So as Attorney General, when I had sheriffs from all over my state calling me to say that the Biden administration was canceling detainers on criminals in their jails and telling them to release them back into the communities, I was horrified.
Workers whose wages are undercut. He acknowledges some Republicans also seem indifferent, suggesting a bipartisan lack of urgency. The underlying cause, as framed here, is a mixture of political self-interest, demographic strategy, and ideological branding, rather than an honest policy debate about balancing security, humanitarian concerns, and economic needs. The broader dynamic reflects the U.S. immigration debate's entanglement with partisan identity politics, where each side uses the issue as a wedge to rally its base rather than negotiate solutions. In my view, a workable resolution would require stripping immigration policy of its utility as a partisan weapon by pursuing a bipartisan reform package that blends enforcement, modernization, and integration. This would mean restoring and improving border security measures, including physical barriers where necessary, technological surveillance, and sufficient.
Horrified not only because I work with law enforcement across the state, and I knew that was doing what that was doing to their communities, but horrified because I knew that went against not just the policies of Republican administrations, but Democratic administrations. It was a radical's wish list. They had changed the entire policy on whether or not we were going to deport serious felony offenders, and their agenda was no. And the resulting crime that occurred across this country as a result was predicted. I predicted from the beginning of this administration, I was one of the first states to sue when they stopped deporting people here illegally that were committing crimes against Americans in our communities. So the gaslighting that started under the last administration when Mayorkas showed up and said the border is secure, and I guess he thought the American people would believe that. It's still going on. There are so many felony offenders that are here illegally in our country that because Biden released them, this administration has to do the hard work of tracking people down and deporting anywhere from 11 million to 20 million people because we don't know who's in this country. On a conservative estimate, 11 million people is more than the population of 42 of our states. And most of those people were unvetted. So you're going to hear a lot about people here that just want a better life. But make no mistake, Biden and his administration purposefully unleashed those here illegally committing crimes on you and on your families. And it was intentional.
Manpower, revising asylum and deportation processes to be faster and more consistent, mandating employer verification to reduce incentives for illegal hiring, and pairing these with a legal pathway for long-term undocumented residents without violent criminal records to earn legal status after thorough vetting. Such a plan would have to include a serious overhaul of the visa system to meet labor market needs without incentivizing illegal crossings, as well as targeted foreign aid to address root causes in migrant-sending countries. Crucially, Congress would need to reform how census counts affect political representation, potentially distinguishing between citizens and non-citizens to remove incentives for mass non-enforcement. Without tackling both the political incentives and the operational failures, the immigration debate will remain a cyclical talking point rather than a solved problem, leaving figures like Moody and Padilla locked in theatrical exchanges while the underlying situation persists, driven by economic demand, human desperation, and political gamesmanship.